I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. This month, Maryland Comptroller Brooke Learman issued a report on school construction in the state, and expectedly, it was grim. 81% of all school buildings in the state were judged to be unreliable or in need of repairs. Local and state governments share capital spending on schools, including major repairs, portables for overcrowding, and HVAC replacement. The comptroller's report says that on a per pupil basis, the state government provides 23% of all school construction spending in the state, and the counties together provide the bulk, 74%. Usually, state aid comes as reimbursement on specific projects, and different counties are reimbursed by the state at different rates. Montgomery and Anne Arundel at 50%, Howard at 56%, Frederick, the fastest growing county in the state population wise, 65%, and Prince George's 73%. The difference between the reimbursement rate, 50% for Montgomery, and actual state share of capital spending, closer to 23%, would imply one or more things. Some counties, presumably with stagnant or declining populations, are not receiving much in the way of state aid for school construction. Counties such as Montgomery are likely spending more on capital projects that are not reimbursed, which further means that some construction projects might not be eligible for state aid. And in Montgomery's case, not adopting prevailing wage standards in school construction contracts has significantly limited what the state gave to the county over the last decade. The thicket of school construction design, planning, and funding at the state level lies in an innocuously named state agency called the Interagency Commission. They are the ones who determine eligibility, approve reimbursement, and manage the system. One criteria the IAC used in the past to determine eligibility was whether a school district was choosing to build a new school or expand an old one when another school nearby had open seats. What is nearby? Unclear. But you can imagine the power of this idea because it essentially is asking the school district to rationalize enrollments, possibly through school boundary changes. This criterion was suspended a few years ago at the behest of Montgomery County and Montgomery County Public Schools, according to my guest today, District 20 delegate and House of Delegates Majority Leader David Moon. And he is looking for ways to bring back fiscal responsibility at a time the state is going through budget troubles. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
You save yourself, but don't let me go, don't let me go.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com. David Moon, welcome back to I Hate Politics.
Hey, happy to be back.
For some time now, I believe you've been thinking about conditioning state aid for school construction in counties to utilization of schools. What is your thought process?
Well, I think we have to back up and explain what this issue is. There's a lot of complexity to this, but it's really not a school construction issue. Um, School construction in Maryland and probably in most places around the country is an issue both about school overcrowding and about housing and housing construction. And these two issues collide because many communities, including here in Maryland, they have school construction funds and then they have school boundaries that they hopefully periodically adjust as populations move around and school enrollment changes. And then they have other rules that say things like if you're building new housing, there has to be room in the new school or in the old school for the number of children that may live in the house or housing project that you're creating. And that seems like a very sensible rule. Now, additional places have layered on more nuance to this, and they've said, and not only are we going to gauge how much school capacity you have before we allow housing to be built, if we deem it to be overcrowded there, we're going to shut down housing altogether. This is really a question about school capacity, school construction dollars, and housing construction. These are now very linked issues, and they relate to school boundaries. Why does this all come together? Well, if counties are shutting down housing construction on the basis of overcrowded schools, we better know that them saying a school is overcrowded is actually a legitimate claim. So that's the first problem. How can we trust the counties when they say a school is overcrowded? Is it actually overcrowded? And then after that, we have additional questions. Okay, so let's say a school is overcrowded. Is stopping the construction of housing the correct solution to that? Why is the better solution not to build more school capacity and therefore allow the housing to proceed? And this set of questions has been at the heart of policy proposals that I've worked on for several years now.
It usually is the case that in most counties, some schools are overcrowded while others are not. So, in fact, there is space in those other schools. And what the counties want to do is to stop new housing construction in places where schools are crowded, but have them in places where schools are not overcrowded. So they are trying to move construction to other places, but can't because the demand in the overcrowded area for housing and schools is greater. Somehow the overcrowding under enrollment of schools has to be balanced out, and then you measure for overcrowding. Is that an issue at all?
Let's start here. What problem are we actually trying to solve? I mean, I would put a few policy problems out there as priorities. Today, the comptroller reports, I'm looking at Maryland Matters, September 19th, yesterday. Headline, 80% of public schools in need of repair, renovation, or replacement. And if you go through this, our state comptroller has issued a series of reports just about state data. And this one says that the supermajority of Maryland public schools their buildings are not in good state and are going to need a tremendous amount of repair, renovation, or redo. I mean, this is just for existing buildings to keep them in the same state, same enrollment, which if you can read between the lines means we have billions of dollars of backlogged capital requests. If you look how that plays out in Montgomery County, we call it the Q, right? Everybody knows about the Q, who's a school or PTA activist. your school hopefully is somewhere on the queue and you're just waiting for it to move up the queue. And sometimes there's errors and delays and what have you, but there's the damn queue and everyone's waiting. And probably most parents who are staring at the queue are not going to be there with their kids in that school when they're not on the queue, right? This is the reality of life with the queue in Maryland. So I would say school construction dollars, not by me, not by my measure, by the measure of the experts at the state, is probably the biggest capital funding problem we have, next to, say, transportation capital projects. And if you talk to the people who manage the state's portfolio of schools overall, the interagency commission that looks at schools, school resources, school boundaries, and things of this nature, they would tell you that the school property portfolio is the state's most mismanaged set of assets by far, that the financial mismanagement of the school buildings is the biggest mismanagement. And so here again, I just state to you, problem number one is we have a giant backlog of school construction and repair needs, and we are heavily mismanaging it. The primary problem is that we just don't have enough funds up front or a dedicated funding source that's guaranteed to cover these needs. But that just means we have no room for error whatsoever for counties to play BS with whether a school is or is not crowded. So I'm just going to start there. School construction dollars is a huge problem. All the other problems that everybody else is citing, you have to think about how you line that up next to that priority. And there I'd include things like this neighborhood doesn't want to be moved to that elementary school, or this portion of families doesn't want to. And at some level, again, when you're talking about management of a giant portfolio of this size, the system cannot be working those priorities in until such time as the fundamental problem of the overall financing is in a better state. And we are, again, billions and billions there. So it's very difficult to hear me listen to local complaints about the queues if folks aren't willing to look at some of the other underlying problems here. So that's problem number one. Now I'll relate it to a couple other issues. And there's just a huge misunderstanding about all of this too. The data points are just not, even if you were to say you disagree with me policy-wise on all of my goals here, it's hard to say that the evidence even backs up the opponents. For example, on school overcrowding issues, and look, I want to be clear, there are legitimately overcrowded school zones, right? I mean, Frederick County is bursting at the seams. It's had huge growth in recent years. You've got other places with declining enrollment. And this is a huge problem. No one wants to see a school get closed in their neighborhood. But if you have a school system with huge enrollment declines happening, not enough construction dollars, but then you're in a scenario, say, where you might be able to put the kids from two schools into one, and shave the overhead. That's another scenario. That's a very unpopular situation. And I actually have far more sympathy for those communities, actually, where what they're facing is school closure, than I do for the other situation we face, which is a overcrowded school next to an undercrowded school. And people don't believe that this exists, but it does. And it exists across the state. In county after county, you will see unnamed members of Montgomery County have kids, of the county delegation have kids. They've told me about this. They're in an elementary school that's overcrowded, and the one next door to them has empty seats. And they're baffled as to why this is allowed to exist. And the larger question then comes, does the state have any responsibility to prop up the counties in their unwillingness to use the empty seats they have available to them? I don't think so. Why is that our problem? Why should we be subsidizing the school systems who want us to continue to allow them to leave empty seats unused? And they're doing it fundamentally. I mean, we all understand this, right? This is to please parents in the possibly affected area, which I totally understand, and I don't mean to diminish, the hard feelings that come with that. But again, from a resource management and a system management perspective, I have to wonder if we really should be making that the state's problem.
How does your proposal address this?
Well, there's the proposal I had last session, and there's the proposal I'll bring back in the next session. And there's probably going to be a proposal in the session after that. So this is all to say, this is iterative, and I'm testing and trying to get progress done. But here's some things to note. As I was taking this effort on, I started last year trying to do a few things. So for one, this idea of putting a neighborhood into a housing construction moratorium because the school is overcrowded, to me, this is an insane policy. And I was really trying to understand it. Montgomery County had this years ago, and the minute a moratorium kicked into place, they ended it because it didn't make sense. And other counties are now taking a look at this. This was my first target. I said, this is an insane policy in a period of a housing shortage. And when I looked around, for example, in Montgomery County, where a lot of people are like, oh, you can't allow these apartment towers to go up. This is overcrowding our schools. Actually, there's no evidence of that. The data that has come out from the county indicates almost 100% that school overcrowding is coming from turnover in single-family homes. That is a single-family home occupied by people without kids in MCPS being turned over to people who bring kids into the school system. It's single-family home turnover causing school overcrowding in Montgomery County, not the apartment construction. And again, I'm not saying apartments don't bring children, but the data in Montgomery County shows the overcrowding does not come from the new development that you've seen in the county. So that's a huge, important point. Is this even effective as to what they think it's doing? Or is all we're getting is a shutdown of housing, but no relief on the overcrowding, right? What does stopping an apartment building do to alleviate the crowding that's in the school system today? Nothing. It does absolutely nothing for it. So the policy I tried to put in place was to put a time limit on how long a county could shut down housing for. In other words, say, okay, it's overcrowded. Maybe you need 2, 3, 4 years to what? Either use existing seats available to you and change the school boundaries, or build something. How much time do you need to build capacity? As I put that policy proposal together and I started talking to stakeholders, I learned a shocking thing. At the request of MCPS, Montgomery County Public Schools, the state actually changed its law and went in the opposite direction on this policy just a few years ago. The state has matching funds that we give school systems to build extra capacity. So let's say Montgomery County has some schools that are overcrowded. They plan a project to build capacity, and then they come to the state for matching funds. We legislators fought for things like this so that there was more money to the school systems for overcrowded schools. Well, one of the rules we used to have was counties should know that there is an exception. If you have a project, you're applying for funds because the school's overcrowded, but it's next to a school that has empty seats. The state used to deny you funds for that project. Not your own funds, just matching funds. In other words, the state said, hey, wait a second. You're claiming this school is overcrowded, but the one next door has empty seats. Guess what? We are not paying for or subsidizing your project in the overcapacity school because you decided not to use the seats right next door, and that's not our problem. Well, I discovered that MCPS snuck into a provision into law I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago that undid that rule. And it says MCPS and all the counties may receive state matching funds for a supposedly overcrowded school, even though they have refused to use the empty seats next door. Why the hell did that thing get passed into law? I don't know. Why the hell did MCPS request this? I don't know. And at some point, I don't care, but I have now tried to undo this policy. So the bill I attempted last session, again, it was put a time limit on how long you could shut down housing on the basis of alleged school overcrowding.
What was the time limit?
I started with 2 years, and by the end of the process, I moved it to 4. 4 years is the length of the Howard County allowable housing moratorium for schools.
Howard County is moving away from moratorium too.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Precisely. So the state, frankly, like we went in the wrong direction on this. We made it easier for schools to politicize resource efficiency. So that's one whole basket of reforms. The other, I tried to sneak in there, 2 other ones, was to give the state all of the enrollment address data for students in every county. Not identifying information, just address information, anonymized, disaggregated data, so that the state can do an independent analysis of school capacity in every county. The IAC, the Interagency Commission, is able to do this analysis. And so that is a provision I'm coming back with this year. Basically, give the state the ability to audit claims by counties about how overcrowded their schools are.
Do you think, David, that the school districts are fudging this?
I'm saying they will come to a different conclusion than the state will about how much capacity they have.
Sounds like fudging.
Hey, people can look at the same set of numbers and come to very different conclusions. I'm just telling you that the experts I've talked to on this, again, believe this is the largest asset mismanagement in all of the state that we are witnessing, and that local school systems have plenty of schools with empty seats that they are unwilling to use.
Before you go forward, when you say that this is the biggest asset mismanagement in the state of Maryland, do you mean variance in utilization? Do you mean how the maintenance works? What exactly do you mean? Can you explain that?
Resource waste. This is the biggest resource waste you're likely to see. Do we have a plan that maximizes the impact of state dollars and minimizes the need for state dollars? I think you could not say that that's the case.
Okay, go ahead. What else is on the cards for you?
The other bit we tried here was we obviously did not succeed at capping the housing moratoria. So one of the things we tried to do instead, or in addition to, was say, all right, if you're shutting down housing, let's at least let the permitting for housing that's stuck in the queue continue during the period of the moratorium. Otherwise, it's not really a 4-year moratorium. If it's 4 years, but people can't even begin the process of a housing application at all, then it's 4 years plus whatever, 1, 2, 3 more years. It's actually many years. A school's class worth of people will have moved in and out of the neighborhood potentially, during that period. So trying to at least cut short how long we're banning housing from being built. So that's just a big basket of it. This was preceded, people might forget, years ago, I had a bill that passed in Montgomery County. And this was when the county undertook its boundary discussion. And again, everyone went hysterical about DEI and busing and all this stuff. But I was looking at this first and foremost as a resource mismanagement issue. And even with all the hysteria people are making, really, how can you justify this adjacent empty seat problem? It really doesn't, who's arguing against that? I'm not talking about going from, Darnestown to, where I live in the southeast corner of the county. But again, adjacent schools, very similar neighborhoods. Do people really have a screaming problem about this in every instance? And if they do, how much should we cave to that? I don't know. So years ago, during the Montgomery County boundary fight from a few years ago, I put in a bill that it altered real estate contracts in the county to warn people that the school that is currently listed as the district for a house is not guaranteed. You're not buying the school district, you're buying a house. The school doesn't come with the house. And we had that put into all the home sales contracts in Montgomery County.
Do you think that's worked?
No, of course not. But my motive for it, 100%, was as these people were having a ridiculous debate again about resource mismanagement and for some very fundamental questions. Hey, we got a school boundary bill passed with a unanimous vote in Montgomery County House delegation at a time when the county leaders were dithering and twisting their thumbs, over what to do about it. They still are. We haven't gotten it done. Get it done, guys.
What are you doing this year to bring this vision to life?
Oh, this is going to be a multi-step process. I realize this might be a new and wonky topic for folks, and maybe perhaps I intentionally came on very strong with a bill to ban many of the offensive practices. And this year, I'm coming back with a scaled-back approach, I believe cross-filed by Senator Lamb, and he actually took on some of the Howard County school boundary stuff at the same time I did the real estate bill years ago. So we have a history of being in our various counties trying to call for more sensible school construction, school boundary, and housing construction policies. So we'll be back next year to give the state the window into school system enrollment data again, so that they can audit school systems' claims of overcrowdedness. And I'm going to proceed with the reform to allow housing permitting to continue during a housing moratorium.
How could you closely tie school utilization to actual state aid for construction as it used to be and was diluted at the request of MCPS?
This is all going to depend on how much appetite state leaders have for enforcing.
Hold the political argument for a second, but just technically, how would you do that? And then we can talk about the politics.
It wouldn't be hard to condition any number of state school construction dollars on certain metrics for efficiency of their current use of school seats and school resources.
What's an example?
Like utilization rates. Certainly, you could look at the overall utilization rate for a county. You could look at regional utilization rates.
How far would you, if there's a school with an open seat nearby, next door, you said, then send them there. But how far will a law be able to check that? For example, one of the reasons why MCPS has difficulty in moving kids from one school to another is because they have to move from one cluster to another. A cluster is essentially a head of a high school and its feeder system, right? And so if you go from one cluster to another, parents get more upset than if you're within the cluster. So that's the reason for asking this.
Those can't be my problems. I mean, honestly, let me just start there. They can't be my problems, and they can't be the state problems. Like, honestly, when you're down to the cluster level, guess what? I mean, again, we're talking about the management of the whole state's worth of resources. And this is the nonsense we get dragged into. Do you really want us looking at the Howard County school clusters and how the parents feel about, or the Frederick County school clusters? Like, why is this the state's problem? It's not the state's problem. Here's the number of students you have. Here's the number of dollars you get, right? Like these are the buildings. Like this is math. Everything else that you're putting in there is not math. That's politics, and that's what we've been allowed. This is precisely what we've allowed to go on for all this time. And I guarantee you, if you add this up across every county and every school district, there's a ton of resource waste coming from this problem. And the school clusters, I mean, give me a break. Like, the construction of the school clusters to begin with is sort of a bunch of crazy nonsense. I mean, look at Montgomery County school clusters, Do you believe that these school clusters were created in some rational way that's fair? Why are we wedded to the school clusters? Someone's got to explain that one to me. Maybe if you live in the W school cluster, you have very strong feelings about not being or about being pulled out of it, right? I mean, but is that the dynamic you're talking about? Because if that's it, I think that's precisely the dynamic that the states should not care about as they're looking again at coming up with a rational funding formula.
Governor Moore recently issued an executive order asking for housing targets by county.
Yeah, you could do that, but I mean, you could do that for anything. You could do state aid for transportation conditioned on housing targets. I don't know that we need to be yet in a place where we're not going to give you school construction money if you don't also build more housing. That's perhaps several steps out in aggressiveness. But asking for money for school overcrowding when you're actually making the problem worse yourself voluntarily, I don't know. That seems like a bit of a stretch to be asking the state.
You have dismissed concerns from parents who say that they are buying a school as well as buying a home. But those parents have real political power.
I'm not dismissing their view. I'm just saying the state funding is not the place where that battle should play out. The state funding should be
Tomato.
no. But this is true. That's a count. Hey, you want to have a school boundary fight? Go to the school board and take it up with them. But again, as to whether the state should pay the school board if they decide to placate those parents, absolutely not. That's not our problem. The school board's totally entitled to listen to the parents and not redistrict that school. That's their right. But we do not have the money to pay for that.
So if they're not going to fix the utilization problem, they're on their own.
With state matching funds. That's my proposal.
Do you know how much matching funds MCPS gets?
Oh, it's a lot. And actually, I want to be very clear about this too, because when I put this proposal out, someone said, Moon, are you really trying to take away school construction dollars from MCPS? I said, that's not what my bill does. Let's say MCPS is designated to get $300 million in a given year for school capacity matching grants. If my bill passes, they still get $300 million. They just can't use that $300 million for schools that legitimately don't have a crowding problem. School system still gets the same money. It would just be their choice if they're going to placate parents on these complaints about not moving their kids. And again, that's fine if they want to do that, but they do it with their own money then. Counties are entirely able to make that political decision with their own money.
Are your colleagues on board? What is the politics of this?
Let's see. I had a couple bills on this topic last year. One of them moved, but it wasn't this one actually. So I would say my colleagues' views are unknown. If you go back and watch the hearing, it was very interesting. Howard County delegate made remarks supporting my legislation at the hearing, and now a Howard County senator is going to cross-file the bill in the coming year. And this comes on the backdrops of Baltimore County trying to mess around with their adequate public facilities ordinance right after the Assembly passed Governor Moore's bill trying to expand more housing. There are some players within some counties who are trying to avoid creating more housing. And so we're in a bit of a cat and mouse right now as we put in retaliatory legislation to try and pull them back into line.
Do you understand why Baltimore County is particularly intransigent?
It's not shocking to me. Anti-housing or NIMBY kind of politics is bipartisan and cross-county in this state. When we had housing legislation come up this year, it's interesting. You had a Republican from Frederick getting up against it. You had people from Baltimore County, Democrats, had questions about it. But then I go into the private meetings with the same people, Republican county executives and whatever. Everybody knows what's going on here. Threading the needle with your local NIMBYs. It's every county, every party. And yet, we have this pro-housing policy agenda slowly still making headway, I think, on top of it. And on the other side of this, too, there are Republicans and Democrats both who are on the other side of this. The Republican minority leader, Jason Buckle, is a pro-growth guy, and he is out in Cumberland in Allegheny County That's a place that had population decline for many, many years, was once, an economic engine. And now, it's coming back with downtown revitalization and Main Streeting. He's been a huge proponent of housing coming in.
David Moon, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Drew Pictures and the Lead Extras, an indie pop rock band based in Rockville, Maryland. Andrew Glore on vocals and keys, Brian Wolf on guitar, and Josh Wilson on drums. The songs come from their album Cats on Santorini. You can find their music at drewpicturesmusic.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
I'm your mirror, mirror hanging on the wall.